Good morning, everyone. This is Ian Henderson from WCASA. Welcome to our Quarter 2 CCR and SART webinar. Today's topic is going to be on the Wisconsin Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, or WiSAKI. As you all probably are aware, this is a topic that has received a lot of attention both in the media and from WCASA and DOJ in recent months, and so we wanted to provide you an update on where things are with respect to testing of the unsubmitted kits, and we're going to walk you through some great resources. We're delighted to have Keeley Crowley, the SAKI site coordinator from the Department of Justice, here today to present to you. I will chime in as needed, but for those who are on the webinar and how we relate this to particularly multidisciplinary teams across the state, we really think that particularly, obviously, the topic of the testing of the unsubmitted kits and what happens when kits are tested and there maybe are positive results, how multidisciplinary teams, SARTs and CCRs, are going to handle those kits as they come back, what they're, and we would certainly encourage that the processes regarding decisions about victim notification, which we're going to talk about, that those be done in a multidisciplinary and collaborative manner. But we think that, we hope that what you'll find out from the webinar today is some really tangible starting points and tangible conversations for CCRs and SARTs to have across the state. We know from our work with those teams that sometimes finding or identifying tangible tasks sometimes is a challenge for teams, that teams are sharing updates but not feeling like they're moving forward. Well, we think for SARTs and CCRs, this particular topic provides some really good fodder for conversation and some really tangible things that teams can work on regarding how they're going to be responding as these kits that are being tested come back, and how we can inform survivors in the most trauma-informed and victim-centered manner. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Keeley Crowley from DOJ.
Great. Thank you, Ian, and thank you to WCASA for the invitation to be here to talk to everybody about Wisconsin Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, and just also to WCASA for being such a tremendous collaborative partner throughout this whole past probably 3, 4, even longer years that we've been looking at the issue of unsubmitted sexual assault kits around the state. One of the things that I think, just to echo what Ian had discussed in his intro, is, certainly DOJ is kind of leading this initiative because we are doing this on a statewide effort, but we're really now to the point of recognizing, like Ian said, once kits start coming back that have been tested, they're going back, and the work is really going to be coming back to local jurisdictions, law enforcement jurisdictions who submitted the kits, local sexual assault service providers who are there to collaborate on any efforts to re-engage survivors in the process, certainly for prosecutors' offices to be able to evaluate whether or not a case can go forward for prosecution. The fact that people are taking interest about how to do this and how to do this well in their communities, I think is such a tremendous resource and valuable opportunity. So I want to also extend my appreciation to those of you who have taken interest in this topic and are spending some time with us this morning. So looking at SAKI from kind of that multidisciplinary perspective, I think for most of us who work in any kind of discipline where you're responding to a sexual assault, or for anybody who just has a genuine interest in understanding the issue of sexual assault in any kind of realm or impact, we know that a sexual assault really, truly can be one of the most traumatic experiences in a survivor's life. And so we recognize that there can definitely be a long-term impact. Whenever we're looking at re-engaging with survivors, it provides us an opportunity really through SAKI to offer a genuine apology to survivors for the fact that the sexual assault kits weren't tested when they were first collected during a SANE exam. It gives us the opportunity to regain trust for that survivor in the criminal justice system, to really relate to them that we absolutely do care about them and their experience and want to respond in the fullest manner that we can, whether that's with providing services or looking at the opportunity to reopen an investigation, possibly pursue a prosecution, really just let the survivor know that we absolutely do care about what happened to them and want to give them as much support as possible. And really the best way to do that, we want to make sure that we're doing anything with the utmost consideration of the impact on survivors. So any attempt to notify a survivor or re-engage them must be done in a trauma-informed way. And what I wanted to share with you this morning was resources that we have available through WCASA, through DOJ, so that we can be really very transparent and open and honest with our communities, with as Ian said, with the media, with our funders, and most importantly with survivors, so they understand what this process looks like and the work and the efforts that are being done, and so that they can help inform our work, so that they can, talk to sexual assault service providers who can collaborate with their teams and eventually relate to us on a statewide level of what best practice looks like. So I would also like to refer, we're not going to spend a lot of time this morning talking kind of about the history of the Attorney General's Sexual Assault Response Team and the efforts to address the unsubmitted sexual assault kits, because WCASA does have an archived webinar on their YouTube channel that was done probably over a year ago, maybe even a year and a half ago, that kind of gives some background. So if people are interested in that, I would encourage them to look at that. We definitely know a lot more about the issue now than we did then, So any questions about that information contained in that webinar, you can certainly connect with myself at DOJ or anybody at DOJ or WCASA with additional questions. What we wanted to focus on today was kind of where we are now in the process. And one of the most significant things that's occurring right now is the testing of the previously unsubmitted sexual assault kits. So please know we have a website. A lot of folks have been very engaged, and a lot of folks on the phone have been really engaged with this process for a long time, so maybe have navigated the website, and this looks familiar to you. But for those of you who don't, I would encourage you to take some time and just look at what is all available on our WiSAKI website, which you can access at wisaki.doj.wi.gov. And on the homepage, when you get there, you're going to see a message from Attorney General Brad Schimmel talking a little bit about, what DOJ's efforts have been with WiSAKI, and talking about, why this is such an important issue for him in his experience as a prosecutor, and how he has seen sexual assaults move through the criminal justice system, the impact that they've had on survivors, and recognizing just the importance of that multidisciplinary response. Also recognizing Attorney General Schimmel did take, the efforts to put in his message, recognizing that we do owe survivors an apology, that we're sorry that some of them are in this position of maybe thinking at the time their kit was collected, maybe they were told that their kit would be tested, and they didn't understand the process of what factors were considered and what determinations were made of whether or not to test a kit. And for anybody who feels like they were misinformed or that something didn't happen that should have happened, like the Attorney General said, because of maybe that system failure, we do want to apologize to survivors. Number one, that they ever had to deal with a sexual assault in the first place, or had to engage with the criminal justice system or go through a SANE exam. Just recognizing that we're sorry that they're having to deal with it, and wanting to make a commitment to them of what we are doing and working to address the issue. At the bottom of the page, you'll see some links to some frequently asked questions. On the side, you'll see some updates from recent press releases or WiSAKI in the news. You can also navigate to those sections at the top for the frequently asked questions, and again, the section of the news. Moving to the About section, you're going to see some details, like I said, with the history of WiSAKI, how we really are very, very fortunate to have received significant resources from the Bureau of Justice Assistance, as well as the District Attorney's Office of New York, who have granted us funds from the District Attorney's Office of New York solely to test the previously unsubmitted sexual assault kits, and then from BJA to do a variety of things throughout the state that we're going to be talking about in a little bit more detail in just a little bit. So you can see there's some more information on that process. But what I really wanted to spend some time, like I said, you can see more about the AG SART and that history. But one thing, as we're moving into talking about where we are right now with the kit testing, I wanted to give you just a little bit of a background of where you can find more information about what the start of that process for testing the kits looked like. One of the requirements from the Bureau of Justice Assistance for the grants that we received from them was that we needed to complete a certified inventory of all the law enforcement agencies in the state so that we had an accurate picture of how many kits that we still had around the state in the custody of local law enforcement and local SANE programs. That inventory was a significant undertaking for a few reasons. Number one, the data that we were required to collect, there was probably between 10 and 12 data elements that we needed to collect on every single kit from every single law enforcement jurisdiction. So those data elements included everything from the date of the assault to the date the kit was collected, the date law enforcement took possession of the kit, looking at how much time remained on the statute of limitations, why the kit wasn't submitted in the first place, and just a variety of information. So a lot of data elements, and we had to collect inventories from every single law enforcement jurisdiction around the state, which totals 557 law enforcement jurisdictions. So for jurisdictions where they had maybe hundreds of kits, again, it took a lot of time for those to complete those inventories, understandably. What I think is really commendable for law enforcement in our state that I'm really proud to say of our collaborators is that we had 100% participation. We received inventories from 100% of those agencies and local SANE programs, and that was a voluntary participation. We didn't have to legislate or mandate that participation. Law enforcement pretty much just said, tell us what you need and we'll figure out how to get you the information. And that's something that I think is really important to note, is that law enforcement agencies have been definitely partners with us on this and wanting to get the information and wanting to move forward with this. So you can see on that page the process of what we went through to get that information. And I will say we've had a lot of great, again, partnering with folks at DOJ within our Division of Criminal Investigation agents who really spent a lot of time working with law enforcement to get that information. Once we had our inventory complete and we had that information, we were able to move forward with testing the kits. Now, having thousands of kits that were going to be designated for testing, DOJ made the decision that instead of trying to include those kits in the workload of our state crime lab, that we would seek external partner labs to do the majority of the testing for us, because we really did not want to impact the turnaround time for testing on evidence that was coming in from current sexual assaults that were reported or just other crimes that were reported to law enforcement. So we went out and were able to contract with some external partner labs. 3 of them actually now at this point have tested kits for us. That once we had the inventories from law enforcement, staff at our crime lab and at DOJ were able to look through and identify which kits would be designated for testing. They followed up with local law enforcement to give them a list of the kits that they should send in. Local law enforcement then sent them to our state crime lab, where they went through an intake process so that they were, included in the state's inventory system and just our internal tracking systems. And then they were packaged up and they were sent out at some point to one of the 3 external labs. So you can see with the diagram that we have there included on that testing page exactly what that looked like, step by step. Submitting the kits to the state crime lab, doing the intake process, keeping the kids at the crime lab until they were ready for shipment, shipping them out to the external partner labs, and then the external partner labs testing the kids. What happened then once the testing was done at the external partner lab, they were then sent back, they submitted their findings back to the state crime lab, where they would undergo a technical review process by analysts and staff at the state crime lab, who would then issue reports back to local law enforcement who originally submitted the kit for testing. There's a good description there kind of at the bottom too, along with every step. Like I said, every step of that has some explanation in that graphic. But it talks there about the process of what happens if and when a foreign DNA profile is found in a sexual assault kit, or a perpetrator is identified through CODIS, which is the FBI DNA database. Local law enforcement would be notified. What's great about, we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of that follow-up process from DOJ, but really where the SART response we're hoping is going to be initiated in communities is when that law enforcement agency receives that report back about results from the kit, is really where we want to see them engaging with their SART partners to talk about, okay, what do the results mean? Really evaluating whether or not an investigation can be reopened, whether or not there's potential for prosecution, and discussing whether or not victim notification will occur, and if so, in what manner. I don't know, I'm just going to take just a pause break to see if Ian has anything that he wants to add, because I know once I get talking about SAKI, I just keep going, because I just kind of get in the flow. So Ian, was there anything with that you?
No, I don't think at this point, Keeley. Again, I think as Keeley said, I think the work for the local SARTs and CCRs is going to come back after that testing and after law enforcement gets the results of the testing, particularly where there's been DNA identified. And I think when we start talking about, as Keeley's going through the breakdown of how many have been tested and what's come back so far, particularly when we get into the concept of victim notification and having those conversations ahead of time, and we're going to be able to share some resources about considerations to think about when making those decisions, and that those decisions be done through a multidisciplinary process. That's what I would jump in at this point, and we're going to talk more about that as Keeley goes through. So. Great,
thank you.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think is really, really valuable for teams, and one of the things that I think people have really been waiting for, we've been talking about the inventory process, for the past couple years. We've been talking about, yes, testing's going to happen, and yes, eventually results are going to be coming back. And it's kind of been for lack of a better term, kind of a treading water situation, I think, for some local teams, because a lot of teams maybe, depending on when kits were sent for testing, maybe haven't seen a lot of results. And we've maybe kept saying, you know what, just wait, they'll be coming back. And now we do have some results to share because kits are coming back from testing. And I think this really helps put in perspective for all of us, as professionals who are responding, certainly at DOJ working on this, at WCASA, for local teams, and just for people in general. I think there's been a real interest in communities about what this looks like and where we're going with this kind of stuff, because not only has this received a lot of just local and statewide attention, but definitely this is a national issue that people are looking at all over the country, not just in Wisconsin. A little plug for that, I guess, if you are looking for some additional information overall, nationwide, of what the issue looks like, I would really encourage people, if you have the opportunity to see the documentary I Am Evidence, really talks about, impact on survivors of the issues of the unsubmitted sexual assault kits, and just how teams and professionals and communities around the country are responding. So with that, we learned through our inventories that we had 6,833 previously unsubmitted sexual assault kits around the state. That includes both in custody of local law enforcement as well as possession of local SANE programs. Of those total number, 4,155 kits have been designated for testing, and 2,678 of them are not currently designated for testing. And we're going to talk a little bit in just a few minutes about that designation of why kits are designated for testing and possible reasons of why they are not currently designated for testing. Of the kits designated for testing, you'll see there the further breakdown that 1,884 of them testing is complete, while 2,271 of them testing is still in process for those. Moving down a little further there, of the ones where testing is complete, 222 of them, there were foreign DNA profiles identified. 1,149 of them, the kits, there was no foreign DNA profile identified. And as you can see there, 2,784 are still waiting for awaiting confirmed testing results. Of the 222, if you scroll down or watch the page there a little bit, where foreign DNA profile was identified, 167 of those were uploaded into CODIS, and 55 of them were not eligible for upload into CODIS. And we're going to be releasing some updates to our website with additional information on testing and follow-up. But I would encourage you, if you have questions about, well, what does it mean that it's not eligible for upload into CODIS, that you just do a Google search of CODIS and go to the FBI website. They have some really great information about, you know, what that means, what would make something not eligible for upload. So I would encourage you to just go ahead and seek out that information directly from the FBI. Of the 167 kits that were uploaded into CODIS, 75 of those did come back with a hit. And then you can see more information there detailing that with 93 CODIS hits, 15 of those had forensic hits, 78 were offender hits, and then another breakdown between cold and warm hits. Going through that and talking about cold and warm hits and all that kind of stuff, I may sound like I know what I'm talking about. I will talk about being transparent and open and honest. My background is in victim services and advocacy, and definitely not in crime lab or DNA kind of stuff, even though I have learned a tremendous amount from our excellent crime lab staff through this process. What's really great about these graphics and about this information that I must give credit to our SAKI research analyst, Chris Henning, for putting together is that there's definitions for everything at the bottom. So everybody can really understand what those breakdowns mean and just the definition of the testing status information, the testing results, information on what that upload status means, and then certainly on the CODIS results. So I think it's really, really helpful for people to know that absolutely stuff is happening, that we're getting information, that hits are coming back, that the kits, the testing results are coming back, and that we really are moving forward with getting this information. You can also see on that page a breakdown of the inventory statewide. So if you were specifically saying, okay, you know what, Keeley, that infographic was really great, and I really want to know what's happening statewide, but you know what, I really want to know what's happening in my county and in my community. On this inventory page, you will find an interactive map of the state, and you can see by county, the darker the gradient of blue, the more kits that a county had. So visually, you can just look at it by color, but you can also hover over you know, a county and see specifically the number of kits that were identified, total number of kits. Of those total, how many are designated for testing and how many currently are not designated for testing. So if you're, you know, a SART team and you're sitting in Sheboygan County and you wanted to know altogether total, or you just, like I said, somebody, general member of the community, and you want to know, you can go to each county, you can hover over, and you can see the number of kits in that county. If you would go to a county and you hover over and there's no information that pops up, that means that county did not have any previously unsubmitted sexual assault kits.
Hey, Keeley, can I just jump in for a sec? This is Ian, and I think this again would be a really good place. We would encourage SARTs and CCRs, particularly if they're focused on sexual assault, to look at this page and to examine, okay, well, how many kits did we have that were not submitted? How many are submitted for testing? How many are not submitted for testing, right? This, again, data is something that we're often talking to teams about. Look at data as a way to inform your work. Well, here again would be a really good starting point for MDTs, SART, CCRs to begin looking at this and to see, okay, what was the status of the unsubmitted kits in our county?
Absolutely. And that's one of the things, like I said, not only do we want to provide this information just to be transparent with survivors and with our communities, we want teams to be able to use it to help inform their response. So you can also drill down a little bit deeper, and you can look by county. Let's just pick Dodge County. If you're in Dodge County and you're like, okay, that's great information, we've got a couple different law enforcement agencies. What did that look like, for specific agencies? That if you go down by county, you can see for each individual agency what they reported in their inventory. So, for example, you can look at the Beaver Dam Police Department, and you can see that of their total inventory, 5 of the kits are not currently designated for testing, but they have 36 kits that are currently designated for testing. I think what's great about being able to see this is that you can then, as a team, connect with the law enforcement partners on your team to say, okay, we know this is how many kits you have. Let's talk about those 36. When they come back, please share with us what were the results of the testing. Perhaps if the results of the testing came back and said, you know what, of that sexual assault kit sample, there were no foreign DNA profiles found. Maybe law enforcement is going to say, okay, nothing was found there, but you know what, for this case, we have other evidence that we had collected. We have clothing, we have bedding, maybe there was a condom. That's something definitely, if you think there's other evidence that potentially could hold DNA, please contact the state crime lab and talk to them about it and see if there is a possibility to have additional evidence collected. If there's a result that comes back that says, you know what, yeah, there was a foreign DNA profile found, while that may not have resulted in an identified perpetrator through a CODIS hit, it definitely, maybe gives law enforcement an additional investigative lead that they can follow up on. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe having the DNA come back or the results come back doesn't change the results of that investigation, but it's still something that a team can come together and discuss and reevaluate and just give it a second look to make sure, maybe now they know something that they didn't know then. But it just offers the opportunity, like Ian said, for more information and more conversation for teams to have. So I think that's a really great resource, like I said, to be able to look and break it down by your county, by your jurisdiction, to see what was submitted. You can also see, sorry about that. You can also see the collection methodology for all of the inventory and what that looked like. I alluded to it briefly talking about some of that, but you can see it in much, much more detail. You can see a breakdown of the phases that we went through being, at the time we did this inventory, we were one of a handful of states that were pursuing this issue on a statewide level. Certainly a lot of other places were, that had large jurisdictions like Detroit or Houston or, Memphis, had significant numbers of kids, but they were working within one jurisdiction, though large jurisdictions. We were one of only a handful of statewide sites, and even smaller number of sites that weren't just doing pilot sites within their state, but were doing the entire state. So we really were kind of at the forefront of figuring out how to conduct such a massive inventory on a statewide level, how to do it and as time efficient and resource efficient effort as possible. And so you can see more information on how we proceeded and what that looked like, and how decisions were made, how things were categorized, and also how they were reviewed for accuracy in collaboration, like I said, with those local law enforcement agencies. So I would encourage you to take a peek at that as well. I think two of the other really significant pieces of information that we were able to gain from the inventories and that we were able to provide to you as local communities to be able to see, and I think some of the biggest questions that a lot of people just instinctively ask about this were, why weren't the kits sent for testing in the first place? And I know as an advocate, my understanding of how kits were processed for testing or decided to be testing, I didn't know. I thought every kit went for testing. But there were some reasons of why that wasn't the case, and why there were different considerations and reasons decisions were made. So we found a lot of those reasons that were identified in the inventory were categories that were provided to us through BJA of what they were looking for. And so these were categories or reasons that were law enforcement selected from the options that were provided to them, certainly of what, why the decision was made not to test a kit. You'll see there that some of the larger reasons are for that law enforcement chose not to pursue the investigation for whatever reason. Perhaps the prosecutor determined the evidence was not probative, or the prosecutor declined to pursue charges or dismiss the case. We know that a lot of reasons, a significant reason was that the victim did not report the assault to law enforcement. So perhaps there were jurisdictions that were quote unquote Jane Doe friendly, or non-reporting friendly, where if the kit was collected at the same program, but the victim did not want to report to law enforcement would still pick up the kit to be able to keep it in their evidence room to maintain the chain of custody should that victim decide to report at a later date. So a lot of departments were holding on to kits for that very reason. Perhaps it wasn't submitted because the victim reported, but then chose not to pursue the investigation or declined not to continue with the investigation for a lot of really, really valid reasons. We know there are a lot of reasons where victims just choose not to engage with the criminal justice system. In some cases, potentially the victim was identified as not being reliable or not being cooperative. With that conversation, I think that's hard for a lot of us maybe to accept that would have happened. What I think is really, really important context to this conversation and these inventories is recognizing that these kits are kits from assaults that happened anytime from December of 2015 all the way back into kits we learned were from the mid to late 80s. So when you're talking about going back that far, I think there's a lot of things that were different. Prior to the creation or the availability of CODIS, if there was a kit where there was not an identified perpetrator, if it was a stranger perpetrator, or if the issue was consent, those kits a lot of times weren't submitted to the crime lab for testing because there really was no investigative value, if you will, to testing those kits. Because if you don't have an identified perpetrator and you can't compare it to other samples in a database, you're really not going to find any information out of who that perpetrator might be. Same for issues of consent. If you're testing that again and not being able to compare that sample to possibly the perpetrator of other crimes, the information you're going to be able to get is not going to be something that you're going to be able to test for. So that obviously, that creation and implementation of CODIS has been a tremendous resource to law enforcement, because now when kits can be tested, you can potentially identify perpetrators who may already be in that system. We also know that prior to maybe 10 years ago, we did not have the benefit of the research on the neurobiology of trauma or the neurobiology of sexual assault. So the work that's been done by folks like Dr. Rebecca Campbell, who now, when through her extensive research and expertise, we've been able to develop training so that law enforcement knows when they're seeing what might look like deception, or when they're seeing stories possibly change, or when they're seeing a survivor who can't give an exact linear account of the events of the sexual assault. That's not a sign of deception. That's a sign of trauma. Prior to having that knowledge and that training, I think we saw those things as signs of deception, because in perpetrators, absolutely, that's what it looks like. So we have to recognize, like I said, certainly that there were a lot of factors that played into these decisions, whether or not to test these kids. And as you'll hear our Attorney General say a lot of times, or in a lot of communication that he releases, is that when we know better, we do better. And I think that's the most important part, is definitely recognizing that there may have been system failures in the past because of access to resources that we had, or just training and research that we didn't know at the time. But we know now, and that's why we are working so diligently with our community collaborators on addressing these issues, so that going forward, that we will do better, and we will make sure that survivors have access to systems and access to information, that we're responding in the most trauma-informed way. I think what's really critical, though, about putting this out there, again, not only, again, broken record, that we want to be transparent, we want to share it all with you so that your local communities, your local SART teams, if you want to be able to look at your specific county, again, you can break it down by county. And you can say, you know what, I'm really curious, in my county, let's maybe look at Fond du Lac. I want to know in our county, what were the issues? You can break it down specifically, not by agency, but by county, so that you can see what are some of the factors that impacted previous decisions, looking at why kids weren't submitted in that county. You can then look at, okay, what can we do to, again, moving forward, make sure that we are addressing and responding in a trauma-informed manner. So maybe there's some training that we can collectively do as a team on the neurobiology of trauma, on trauma-informed response, on best practices for conducting a trauma-informed investigation or conducting trauma-informed interviewing. What are just some things that we can respond, so that we make sure, again, that going forward, we are doing this in the best manner possible. So again, just information for you to inform your work and your activities. Similarly, we have a breakdown of why kids might not be currently designated for testing. So one of the biggest criteria that you're going to see for this, and one of our biggest priorities to every extent that we are able, is we want to make sure that we are moving forward with the consent of the survivor to test their kid. And our determination to test the kid is whether or not a survivor reported to law enforcement. So if a survivor did not report to law enforcement, we want to, every extent possible that we can, ensure that we are not testing a kit where a survivor hasn't consented. There is a small subsection of kits that, unfortunately, we might not be able to guarantee that for. State Statute 175.405, I believe it is, does mandate that any sexual assault kit where the offense occurred after July 1st of 2011 and the perpetrator is not identified to law enforcement, if law enforcement has custody of that kit, they are required to send it to the state crime lab for testing. So if a survivor presented for an exam, they had an exam collected and they said, I'm not ready to report at this time, if the procedure of that county, of that hospital, of that jurisdiction was that law enforcement would come collect that kit, they wouldn't do a report, but they would maintain custody of the kit in their evidence room. They did not have that option. If those circumstances of the date and the unidentified perpetrator, once law enforcement took custody of the kit, they would be required to submit it. Unfortunately, not a lot of community partners were aware of that requirement. So as an advocate, I had no idea that that statute ever existed. So I would not be able to inform a survivor that this is unfortunately what's going to be required to happen. So we know that there are circumstances where that might happen and where teams are going to have to, look at those instances if that does happen, and what would come from that. If the kit is tested, though, there is a requirement for, as you'll see if you do go look at the FBI website on CODIS requirements, that one of the requirements to upload results into CODIS is that there has to be a reported crime. So if the crime wasn't reported because the victim didn't report to law enforcement, whether or not that is going to be able to be uploaded into CODIS is something that's maybe going to be for discussion for our crime lab staff. So that's a more technical issue that I don't want to really go into a lot of depth with because, like I said, that is not my level of expertise. And so if anybody has questions about what that might look like if there is one of those kits and what happens, if it gets tested and then comes back, I would encourage you, I'm more than willing to take those questions and refer them to the experts at our state crime lab. So just know that that's a question a lot of people have had, so do want to address it. Another reason, though, that kits currently are not designated for testing is that there's already a conviction related to the incident. So another state statute that we have does require law enforcement to retain any DNA evidence associated with a crime until a convicted offender fully discharges from their sentence. So maybe the kit wasn't tested in the first place because the perpetrator took a plea deal and they were convicted somehow without the need to test the kit. If that person served any period of incarceration, are still serving a period of incarceration, or they have any time on extended supervision or probation, until they fully discharge from that sentence, law enforcement must retain that kit. So a lot of those kits, as you'll see, there are a pretty significant number of kits that are currently retained are also because of that. As with, I apologize, I didn't say it on the previous screen, but I will say it for this screen as well as the previous one about reasons kits weren't originally submitted for testing. Again, definitions at the bottom as to what those designations mean. So you'll see a variety of smaller circles there, and you can, again, see what that means. You also have the option to search by county to be able to see for your specific county. I keep wanting to go to Dodge for some reason there. You'll see by the county why the kits in that county weren't submitted, aren't currently designated for testing. So just a lot of resources that you can look at as teams to further inform just your own knowledge about the issue, but also to inform the context of your conversations going forward about how you're going to look at potential investigation and victim notification. Excuse me. Anything there, Ian, that you wanted to?
No, I'll just, I think, echo, Keeley, what you just talked about with respect to the ability to find county-specific data. And Keeley talked about two of those data points. One, why weren't kits submitted for testing? And some of the possible resources and training and just conversations that you as a county and as an MDT could have about looking at that. Okay, well, why law enforcement chose not to pursue the investigation? What does that mean? Can we have a conversation about why there was a high number of those, for example, that were found in our county, or the victim wasn't credible? Some of those categories that Keeley touched on, I think, is, again, as Keeley talked about, fodder for really good conversation to have at a local team. And then, again, as we mentioned, preparing for the ability to find out how many kits are going to be of those will be tested, to begin having those conversations about what are we going to do when those kits come back.
Absolutely. And really just kind of a perfect segue into kind of that next part of the conversation is, okay, what happens when kits come back for testing? So as I mentioned earlier, results from the kit testing, as with any other evidence that is submitted as part of a crime to the state crime lab, results come back directly to the local jurisdiction, the local law enforcement jurisdiction that submitted the evidence, that is investigating the crime, that is responsible for that investigation. One of the things that we really want to encourage local jurisdictions and local teams to do is to set up a case review process. So that when those results come back, that you can sit down and have a multidisciplinary conversation about what are the options. And that's all going to depend on, obviously, what comes back in those results. But some of the things that you're really going to want to look at is, is this something where the investigation can be reopened? Does the results of the testing come back? Does that maybe change the information or the decision that was originally, when there was maybe an investigation that wasn't able to be pursued for a variety of reasons? Does this change that? And what does that look like? What additional information do you need to know or do you need to find maybe to move forward? Certainly, obviously, law enforcement is critical. It's coming back to them. They're going to be initiating this multidisciplinary response. They're going to be notifying the team when results come back. Certainly, you're going to want somebody from your local district attorney's office there, a prosecutor, to be able to look at this to say, you know what, as great as this information would be and potential to open, reinvestigation, that maybe it does change more than we knew at the time. Are there any statute of limitations concerns? Has statute of limitations expired? It's not really, statute of limitations is not just easy as looking and saying, okay, well, statute of limitations are 10 years, so it's been longer than 10 years. There's some additional considerations that prosecutors can look at to see, if the perpetrator traveled outside of the state, did time stop on the statute of limitations, or just other things that obviously their expert knowledge is going to add to the conversation. Certainly, as Ian said, victim notification is going to be a critical component of that conversation. So obviously, community-based victim advocates, sexual assault service providers need to be at that table to inform that portion of the conversation. We're looking at kits again, at the most recent, that kits are at least as old as December of 2015. So we're at least looking 2.5 years back, potentially a lot longer. What does that look like? Victims may be in a very, very different place by now, and having the conversation with the context of, we don't know what survivors were told at the time of the exam. So coming back to them at a very different point in their life, talking to them about not knowing where they are in their life, not knowing maybe if they've had a chance to deal with the trauma of a sexual assault, not knowing what kind of resources and support they've received since then. There's just a lot to consider, and community-based advocates need to be a part of that conversation. So certainly recognizing, if you do go back to a survivor and want to reengage them or want to notify them of results of the kit testing, in what manner do you do that? Do you go back and try to engage them in person? Do you show up on their door and knock on their door and say, I have information for you? Do you just pick up the phone and call them? And, what happens if somebody else answers the phone, or what happens if they answer the phone while they're at work, or, all sorts of considerations. Do you send them a letter with just some information like, hey, please contact us? So many things that are just what ifs, and every single situation is going to be different, because obviously every survivor is different, every dynamics of a crime is different. Really having to have these conversations about what is potentially the best way to do this. I think something, that I think Ian and I can both attest to, because we've been a part of these conversations for a really long time, is that these are really challenging conversations to have, because the reality is, no matter how trauma-informed we try to be in this process and in these efforts, ultimately having to bring information to a survivor could be potentially re-traumatizing, no matter how it's done. And that's why it's critical not only to have advocates there to inform the conversation, but to be there to provide support and offer services at any point to the survivor. And that's why we wanted to, recognizing this, it can be really challenging, we wanted to provide some resources in the form of a sample notification protocol. So what was challenging in addition to, just looking, oh, I can't make it move. Of just looking to what might be the best way to do this, and not having information from when a survivor was told during the exam, was also that when we were looking at this, there were some recommendations for basic aspects of a notification protocol. There was some through the Joyful Heart Foundation, some input from survivors on really what they thought was best. But there weren't, there wasn't a ton of information out there. There were some other protocols from other SAKI sites that we absolutely referred and borrowed some information for, so we're very appreciative of that. But we really, had to have some deep conversations with multidisciplinary work groups around the state who, with input from advocates and law enforcement and prosecutors and SANE nurses and survivors, and ultimately came to, the decision that from the recommendation from survivors, both locally and nationally, that the recommendation was to notify after testing was done and once we had more information on what information came from the kit. So you can download this notification protocol, and this is just a template. This is something that teams can take and customize for their county, their jurisdiction, for what works best for you. You all know survivors in your community best. You know services that you have. You know how your response works. This is just a template to get you started. And really going through the protocol, you can find information, like we just talked about, of some of the things that are really important. While you customize it, there are just some things that obviously you want to make sure that you account for. And one of the major things is obviously trying as best we can to ensure survivor safety and confidentiality to the greatest extent possible. So always to remember that, when you're deciding what type of notification. So you can look there and just tell you some of the principles that we felt were important, some of the goals of a notification, like we said there, echoing what the Attorney General had issued in his statement there about providing a genuine apology, regaining the survivor's trust. I mean, ultimately, if a survivor doesn't trust the system, the likelihood that they're going to want to re-engage is probably not that good. And certainly if we don't have a survivor, we don't have a criminal case going forward. So it's really important to be re-engaging with them to the extent that they're comfortable and that it's their decision and determination. Again, ensuring survivor safety. To provide some information there about what some of the CODIS, what some of the types of results that the CODIS hits will be. Talks about the different notification types. Right now we're talking about active outreach, and I'm going to turn it over to Ian in just a little bit to talk about what opt-in notification looks like. But it just gives some, again, about notifying the survivors, some things to think about, some notification methods, again, disadvantages and advantages, pros and cons to each, and it really is just going to depend on each individual situation. Talks a little about the survivor notification process there, and just some special circumstances to think about if, you're recognizing the amount of time that has passed, the age of the survivor, of where they are now versus where they were at the time of the crime, is going to be a significant consideration, especially if they were a minor at the time and now they're an adult. Again, talks about that initial contact, whether it's going to be by mail, by phone, or if it's going to be in person. You'll notice with this notification, because we did develop it for our work at DOJ, that you're going to see reference to special agents and victim services specialists. Those are certainly things that you can customize more to local language to refer to law enforcement and victim advocates, or whatever the terminology that you use within your jurisdiction and your team. talking about face-to-face contact, and then also talking about what follow-up might look like. What are maybe some considered reasonable efforts? Again, recognizing that years have passed, most likely since this has happened. Are you going to be able even to find the survivor to provide notification? So looking at some of that kind of stuff. Recognizing that absolutely anybody doing notification should have a certain amount of training so that they're equipped and prepared and just feel confident and prepared to go forward with that notification. A couple other things, like I said, just talking about what the team is going to look at. Again, protecting survivor confidentiality to the greatest extent possible, making sure you allow enough time for victim notification, for the case reviews, and for follow-up. I know you guys are everybody who's doing this work is busy and has a lot of demands on their time, and want to make sure, though, that recognizing that this does, like any other case, really needs to have the time and resources available for people to respond. Prepare ahead of time if you are going to be providing notification. What are you going to tell the survivor? Maybe as a survivor, I want to know if a hit came back on my kit, and I want to know if the perpetrator was identified in the CODIS system. But maybe I don't want to know that after my assault, he assaulted two more people. Maybe that's not the information that I need to get at that time. Maybe it's beyond the statute of limitations, so I do want to know that nothing can be done with my case, but I still maybe want to know that this perpetrator was identified, because maybe initially nobody believed me. Maybe my friends and family didn't believe me. So maybe this is going to offer me some validation that absolutely, I was telling the truth and what I was reporting was accurate. I think of just utmost importance as well, really to consider issues of cultural diversity, or when you're working with communities of color, to be very, very sensitive and respectful of different perspectives and different traditions. I would certainly encourage people, if you don't have culturally specific programs in your communities, to connect with WCASA. They definitely can offer some resources. Again, we want to make sure that we are doing this in the most trauma-informed, victim-centered way, and that absolutely has to include cultural considerations as well. So at the bottom there's some resources. If you're saying, let's look for some training for our team, you can see some resources in a variety of areas there. But like I said, this is not a mandate from us that we're saying this is how you have to do it. This is just a guide and a template for you all to have a protocol. I would encourage you, in whatever form that looks like, though, please do develop a protocol for your team so that when you have to deal with the issue of notification, that you're prepared and you know how you're going to, at least, maybe not how you're going to do every notification, but at least that you have this case review team in place so that you can have that conversation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ian to talk about the opt-in.
Yes, thanks, Keeley. I just want to let you know there was one question, and I was just trying to look for it, about where the victim notification protocol is on the WiSAKI website.
It is, and as soon as I said that it was on the website, I realized it probably would be easiest if
I was just trying to pull it up.
So if you go to the About section, and under the AG SART, and we are going to be trying to make an update. Like I said, some of the updates that we're looking to make to our website include some, maybe a page specifically with advocacy victim resources. At the bottom of that AG SART section, the DOJ, the SAKI Survivor Notification Protocol can be found at that link. I do apologize, it's not the most intuitive place to find it, and we know that, and we are going to be looking to make the updates, but that is where you can find it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Keeley. So, as Keeley talked about, I want to talk a little bit about the opt-in notification, and that concept really stems from some technical assistance we were given directly by groups like the Joyful Heart Foundation, as well as from some of the great resources they have put out and have done a lot of work, including survivor focus groups. And one of the key messages that came from that those focus groups and the Joyful Heart Foundation's advocacy is allowing survivors to in as much as possible, control whether and when to receive information about the kid. And so obviously making decision to notify survivors, there's some, that's that more active outreach notification, right? There's not a decision, the survivor doesn't get to choose whether they're going to be notified. That's a decision you're all making as a team. And we do want to provide survivors with that notification. But the opt-in really is more of that, allowing survivors to access information at a time of their choosing. And that really harkens back to something that WCASA rolled out with some great assistance from a local media agency to create the By Your Side website, which you can now see up on the screen. And that website was part of a media campaign that ran, I guess, a little over a year ago. And that campaign was really in the form of online banner ads that would pop up on tablets and smartphones that would, if someone saw the ad saw the By Your Side logo and that it said that you can see up their support for sexual assault survivors in Wisconsin, they could click on that and be directed to the By Your Side website. Again, right, that's allowing that person to say, yes, I'd want to see more information about that. And then to read about that, what is the By Your Side campaign, what's going on with the sexual assault kits, and then to make a phone call, which was to DOJ and the Office of Crime Victim Services to receive more information about their kit if they wanted, right? So that's putting that decision making right firmly in the hands of the survivor. And Keeley talked about some of those kits and the statute 175.405 that said if anonymous kits or kits where law enforcement had in their possession after July 1st of 2011, kits where the offender was not known to law enforcement. And Keeley talked about that could include an unknown perpetrator, but could also include those kits where survivors weren't sure about reporting to law enforcement, and therefore law enforcement had no information about the identity of the offender, that those kits are going to have to be tested. However, there's those other component or those other pool of kits or segment of the 6,800 where they're not going to be tested without survivor consent. Well, the By Your Side campaign, the website, the ads that we're running were really part of an effort to provide that information to survivors so that if they wanted to request testing, they could do so by receiving information, finding out more about it, and then being linked to resources, which would include 1, connecting with the Department of Justice, and 2, being linked to community-based advocacy programs. So while that media campaign and the banner ads haven't been running now for a little over a year, the website is obviously up and running and is available and is a great resource for survivors. And you noticed probably that the WiSAKI website that Keeley was going through links to the By Your Side website. I also want to talk about some efforts that are undergoing as we speak to reinvigorate or to renew these ads that were WCASA and DOJ and the media firm are working on a new media campaign related to the By Your Side website that will be running, again, those online banner ads, but also developing radio commercials and this time our call is going to be, or the call to action, if you will, is going to be a little bit different because most of the testing had not begun when we were running those ads, and that was an effort to reach those survivors who could make the call and could consent to testing of their kits. This is really, we're really wanting to let survivors know that, there are resources in the community for them for support. And that can be survivors who had a kit collected in the past. It can also be survivors who experienced sexual assault recently, right? There's a lot of, I think, the ability to reach survivors on a broader level beyond just the WiSAKI project that we've been talking about. So the ads and the website's going to undergo some changes, and I think it's much more prominent is going to be that letting survivors know that there are resources in the community. And that's for those of you who are advocates, that's your organizations that we're going to really be highlighting the local sexual assault advocacy program. So know that that's coming, and so you may receive calls. Your calls may go up as a result of these ads running, and that would be, I think, a good thing, right? I know when the ads ran a year ago that I received calls from survivors who said, I saw the ad and I had never told anyone, but seeing this made me feel like I could pick up the phone and call. Well, we hope that happens again, right? That if someone has never disclosed that by seeing this messaging, they feel that there's a place they can get information and resources. So stay tuned for more information about that. Like I said, we're going to be modifying the website a little bit, running additional ads, developing the website being translated into Spanish and Hmong, developing more posters and resources that programs can download that will be in different languages, particularly Spanish and Hmong. So again, this is just sort of letting you all know that there's going to be more information coming about that, and that we will be, again, doing that media push that will include the banner ads, also some radio spots that we're really excited to have additional funding to beef up that media campaign.
Absolutely, and I think talking about just transitioning a little bit there, talking about that of resources that are available, certainly I think it's essential to have those resources for survivors, and really appreciate WCASA's leadership on that process. We also have resources for local teams at DOJ. So part of a significant portion of our one of our BJA grants was to fund a SART team to deal with SAKI, to work with SAKI within DOJ. So at DOJ, we have a team comprised of a research analyst, a victim services specialist, an assistant attorney general, as well as 2 special agents from the Division of Criminal Investigation. We also at DOJ have our statewide SANE coordinator, who also is participating in this process as well. And what's really helpful in the process that we're having, so when local law enforcement is notified of the results, whether or not if they're notified if there was a foreign DNA profile found or a CODIS hit from those profiles, the special agents on our team are notified as well. So that gives them an opportunity to follow up with local law enforcement and offer resources and assistance. If there's local law enforcement that says, absolutely, we want to do something about this, but right now, every one of our detectives or every one of our investigators has a full load, and we just won't be able to get to this, immediately, our agents can offer to assist with that investigation or take over that investigation, or just do whatever they can to support that local law enforcement agency. Similarly, we have an assistant attorney general who, if there's a prosecution that's potentially able to be filed, but the local prosecutor's office, can say, hey, you know what? Yes, absolutely, we got it. We're going to take care of it. Or maybe they're going to say, if you can assist us with it. Or maybe they're going to say again, yes, if you want to take it and pursue the prosecution to help us out with it, that would be great. With our victim services specialist, she works to just, participate on part of the team to make sure that every time they're talking about, how they're going to be looking to offer assistance, that certainly that victim component is considered. And then also she's able to work with local sexual assault service providers to connect them. So if the Assistant Attorney General does take over a case in a certain community, that she can connect them with local advocates in that community to be involved in that process, to be involved in the notification, to be involved in providing services. Again, just to make sure that we are also modeling and supporting the sexual assault response in local communities. Any questions that you have for those folks on the team, there is a WiSAKI web email address that you can email, and that it will be directed definitely to the person on the team that can help. So certainly we also have down there, if you ever have media inquiries that maybe somebody is contacting you locally to talk about SAKI and you want to be able to share what you're doing locally, but if they're looking maybe for a statewide perspective, please, there's the information to refer them to folks on our communications team as well. The other 2 resources that I wanted to share before we maybe open it up if we have any questions are to let you know, so we hosted a 2-day victim notification and engagement training in Appleton last November. that was provided by our technical assistance partners on the National SAKI TTA team. And they were really gracious that they recorded the modules for us that we now have available for folks who weren't able to attend, or even maybe folks who were able to attend but would just like a refresher, or they would like to share the training videos with their SART teams to, you know, provide that additional training or context to conversation. If you just go to vimeo.com and in the search hand at the upper right-hand corner, just search for WiSAKI. Our little channel will show up there, and like I said, you have the opportunity there to view those 4 training videos that are provided. That training, we were very fortunate to have nationally renowned subject matter experts come and provide us with that training. In addition, I referenced the SAKI TTA team. At sakittta.org, there is a ton of information from these national providers where you can go and you can access webinars that they offer. They archive all their webinars, and there are, I would say probably at this point, at least 50 webinars up there from a variety of topics to just, again, give you additional information. They also have some fairly new resources that I would encourage people to check out, including a SAKI toolkit. Oh shoot, I was logged in earlier and logged me out here. That you'll be able to look at a toolkit that it provides a variety of resources and a variety of different topics. So if you're wanting to find out more information about engaging victims, you can look to see what they have their information about engaging victims in prosecutions or investigations or victim notification. Maybe my explanation of CODIS and forensic and DNA hits wasn't enough for you. So you want to look at maybe forensics of what it means, you know, to have DNA evidence in kits, or just multidisciplinary response, a bunch of different opportunities for you to get more information, again, from national subject matter experts. I would encourage you to take a peek and explore those. You can also see, if I can get back up, in that same, in those resources, they also have a virtual academy that they have deployed, where you can actually go through short courses in different categories. So if you want to say, you know what, let's learn more about investigations, that you can navigate in there and you can find the courses that they have available on investigation, victim notification, prosecution, again, a whole variety of topics. One even just on SAKI foundations, developing a testing plan, working the case assessment and review, just what we were talking about going through that multidisciplinary review process. You want more information on that? Great, it's right here where you can go and you can download and find more information. You can even, once you progress through the courses, if you do it sequentially, there is just a little kind of a test your knowledge at the end, and if you complete it, there are online certificates available to show that you completed that information. So not only are we trying to provide resources here within the state, we want to make sure that we're connecting you with resources nationally as well. A couple things I just also wanted to share, just kind of like what comes next. Certainly this is going to be an ongoing process with teams, with kids coming back and doing the case reviews, potential notifications. That's going to be continuing to happen in the community. On a statewide level, we want to start looking at things such as potential legislation. Are there conversations that we need to have about developing legislation to ensure that we're never in this position again? That what are some resources that we can have, some guidance that we can have, so we know here are some requirements maybe for when kits should be sent in. We've already developed, I think, a really great process. We've seen the work that can come out of this collaboration, where we now have a non-reporting process for survivors who go to have a SANE exam, and if they choose not to report to law enforcement at that time, instead of law enforcement taking possession of that kit, now the SANE nurse can send it directly to the state crime lab for storage up to 10 years, which is the statute of limitations on second and third degree sexual assault. So at any point in that 10 years, the survivor changes their mind, they can come forward, they can make a report, the kit can be tested. So we know there's potential for change, and we want to make sure that what we're learning through this process, we can use to inform conversations for change and for additional training, additional collaboration, and find maybe what additional resources are needed again, so that we can ensure that we are providing the most trauma-informed collaborative response to sexual assault around the state. So with that, I'm just going to pause for a moment to see if we do have any questions.
Yeah, Keeley, there was one question about where some of the webinars are you referenced, and I know the WiSAKI, the Vimeo, which was from the training back in November. Is that linked from the WiSAKI website?
It is not at this moment, but again, the updates that I referenced earlier, it will be.
Okay.
But like I said, right now, if you would just go to vimeo.com, the VIMEO.com, once you're at that site, up in the search box, if you just search WiSAKI, it will be the first result that comes up, and all you need to do is click on that link, and it takes you to the 4 videos on the page.
Great, thank you, Keeley.
Absolutely, and just to go back to the other resources are at SAKITTA.org is where the national site has the resources.
And Keeley, do you need, I know you were typing in a username, do you need to get a username and password for that?
You do. So what happens when you go, if you go up here at the top, so if you go up at the top, when you go to that site, there will be a login. When it brings up that login box that I had to type in, it will also, if you don't have a login, there's a place to sign in or to create a login and a password. So it is accessible to everybody. They want people to utilize these resources, so please do share them among your colleagues and your collaborators as well.
Great, thanks, Keeley.
You're welcome. Is there any other questions?
Yeah, we'll pause for a minute. We've made it through, I think, our content that we wanted to go through today, but we'll pause for a minute to give folks a chance to ask questions if they have any. We'll stay on for a minute or two if people have those questions.
What I was sharing, though, was talking about wanting to come out and talk to local sexual assault response teams. And again, to come out and answer any questions that you may have, talk about SAKI, talk about the resources that are available, provide you with information, provide you with support, answer your questions, and then also have our SAKI team come out and facilitate a mock review, a mock case review with your team. Like I said, we know these case reviews are a valuable process, and we know when they're done, they work very well, and they encourage some great conversation and dialogue, not only for the SAKI case that you're looking at, but I think just for overall collaboration for your SART team on all sexual assault cases. So if you haven't received some communication from me or contact from me, or if somebody on your team hasn't and you would be interested in having us come out and do some presentations and just doing that kind of on-site collaboration, please do let me know. I think it's just a really great opportunity, again, for us to have that conversation. We've gotten out there and have had the privilege. I specifically, I guess I think, have had the opportunity to come out and see your teams in action. As a former direct service provider, it's really energizing to me when I can be a witness to those teams around the table who are really talking about how can we do this better? How can we work together to make this a better experience for survivors? So we want to partner with you as much as we can, again, to support you in that. So please, if you have questions, please reach out to us. And certainly WCASA is always a resource for that as well.
Yeah, and just before we wrap up here, just know that when we are going out and talking to SARTs and CCRs, we're certainly talking about this as well and referring to the website and to the resources that Keeley talked about. And then so can also be a link. You can certainly contact Keeley directly and DOJ, although, again, as we're having the conversations, just know that we are talking about this with local teams as well. Okay, well, seeing no further questions, I think we'll bring this webinar to a close. I want to thank Keeley today for being here and providing us with this great information, and hope you all have found it useful and can really take these resources back and begin having, or continue if you've already begun, having these conversations at the local level. Just a note about upcoming CCR and SART events. WCASA and NWS will be planning the third quarter in-person SART and CCR event. Stay tuned for more information about when and what we'll be talking about in the coming quarter. So that'll be probably August or September. We're finalizing those dates, but know that once we have those dates finalized, we'll be sending that information out along with topics that will be covered at that event. But otherwise, thank you all for attending today, and we look forward to speaking with you soon.